birches. It always was a city game, baseball. That's not how the old pastoralists would have it, of course. They have so loaded the game down with country imagery that it's hard to separate the mythology from the reality now. Little boys chasing fly balls into Iowa cornfields, the natural peeling a bat off a lightning-dammed tree. When it came time to build a Hall of Fame, the lords of the game stuck it up in bucolic Cooperstown, seizing upon some old-timer's letter about how the game...
reduce volume.
In Abner Doubleday's meadow.
Alexa, reduce volume.
Was the Forrest Gump of the 19th century, a Union officer who was there at Fort Sumter, there at Gettysburg, but he wasn't even around for the invention of baseball. The game required too many boys, as Frost's words imply. Only those who have forgotten the punishing isolation of American rural life would believe baseball came of age in the country. The old names give it away. It was called town ball because it was played on those days when everybody came into town for church or market. It was called the New York game because that's where baseball, real baseball, actually started, in vacant lots around what is now the West Side Manhattan neighborhood of Chelsea. It was played not by country boys, but by clubs of middle-class merchants with a little leisure time on their hands. Then, increasingly, by sharp-eyed immigrant professionals, Pat and Nick. The first major league parks, back in the 19th century, were little more than sandlots with rows of precarious wooden bleachers, one step up from those vacant, rock-strewn lots in Chelsea. Eventually, they were ringed, frontier style, with a stockade fence, so the owners could monopolize what was going on inside, charge for admission and food sales, shake down or expel gamblers who dogged the game, expand the fan base to the growing middle class, to children, and even women. These changes were akin to Vegas going family, or to the incandescent cities of fire that rose along the sands of Coney Island during the same period, replacing the site of louche entertainments with the very first official amusement parks. The crowds often broke the walls on the afternoons of big games, but like the cities in which they were contained, the parks were steadily improved by fire. Just as the city's wood shanties were replaced by ornate, block-long apartment buildings, by skyscrapers and bridges, and grand railroad stations and gorgeous, humming electrical generators. The ballparks were replaced by concrete and steel structures that sprouted second tiers and outfield bleachers. Everything getting bigger and better all the time. Just as the country seemed to stretch away forever before the first immigrants, so the ball field is theoretically infinite, the foul lines moving ever farther away from each other until they encompass all of existence. How to traverse this infinite landscape? Just as American industrialists, confronted with seemingly boundless plenty, invented time management, trying to convert all they saw before them into a rational system of production, so too have baseball's acolytes always tried to break the game down into more and more precise statistics, some narrative that will allow us to measure every movement on the field. Air, space, and recreation were the crying needs of the American city by the mid-19th century. They were considered vital to the continued health of both the individual and the polis. No city had a public park of any size. Those wishing relief from the city's racket and bustle resorted to the new rural cemeteries. These had begun to spring up with the consecration of Cambridge's Mount Auburn Cemetery in 1831, followed by Philadelphia's Laurel Hill, 1836, and Brooklyn's vast Green Cemetery, 1838. These were full-scale metropolises, laid out in the British landscaping style of improved nature. with deliberately winding roads and strategically placed trees, bushes, ponds, hillocks, and even boulders designed to maximize dramatic views and uplifting vistas. The need for such places was quickly evidenced by their immense popularity. City dwellers poured out to the new cemeteries for Sunday afternoon picnics, whether a loved one was buried there or not. Greenwood, by far the most splendid and the largest of the scenic graveyards at 478 acres, was drawing 60,000 visitors a year, soon after it opened for business. Rural cemeteries provided fresh air and greenery and the illusion of a beautiful countryside, points out Frederick Law Olmsted biographer Witold Rybczynski. Yet cemeteries were inherently limited by their utility, and there were still fears about the unhealthful miasmas that reputedly leaked up from the graves. Soon, Olmsted and his longtime partner, Calvert Vaux, had begun to lay out one magnificent public park after another in cities across the United States. These were deliberately intended as places of moral improvement, as well as physical and cultural relief. Clean air and a place to stretch the legs were just the start. A dairy was actually built in New York's Central Park, intended to provide free, wholesome milk for the city's poor at a time when it was in short supply. Museums, concert halls, and other cultural institutions were to dot the park's perimeters. Beyond this, the poor were to benefit simply by exposure to their valleys. There need to be places and times for reunions where the rich and poor, the cultivated and the self-made shall be attracted together and encouraged to assimilate. Olmsted wrote. Baseball, on the other hand, wasn't thought to improve anybody. The game itself was all but banned from Central Park for decades. Yet it was in the new ballparks, the only other large open spaces in most American cities, coming into their own just as the first wave of public park building was coming to an end. Assimilation of American men of all classes would actually take place, and usually on a much closer and more intimate basis than ever in other public parks. The new ballparks were laboriously eccentric. For all of their corporate purpose, there was a specificity to them, an endearing individuality that would all but vanish from American business life. No other sport would ever boast such idiosyncratic playing fields, and in no other sport would the field become so critical to how the game itself was played, or such an enduring part of its lore. Unlike the cemeteries and English-style woods, or even the raucous amusement parks, the ballparks remained quintessentially urban structures. They were wedged into street lots, built around railroads and streetcar lines, factories and breweries and livery stables, rivers and highways, and the topography surrounding the parks gave rise to the quirks in their design. Brooklyn's Dodgers got their name because players and spectators alike had to dodge the trolleys to get to their old Washington Park field. Washington's Griffith Stadium featured a right angle in dead center field, a bulge where 5 homeowners had refused to sell. Cincinnati's Crossley Field shot some 377 feet out to right field, but was only 328 feet to left field, in which there was also a small hillock that sent Babe Ruth sprawling in the last year of his career. The Dodgers' later home at Ebbets Field featured a 20-foot-high chain-link fence in right field, above a concave wall and a scoreboard with its immortal lower panel advertising Borough President Abe Stark's clothing store at 1514 Pitkin Avenue. Hit sign, win suit. Every stadium had its own peculiarities. The ones we know best are the thick ivy that clings to the lovely brick walls of Chicago's Wrigley Field, and the great green wall looming over left in Boston's Fenway Park. But this is just because these are the only 2 major league parks to have survived from the era before World War I. So many of the others now vanished, had their own gratuitous grace notes. As early as 1902, Cincinnati had built the short-lived Palace of the Fans, complete with grand Beaux Arts columns and pillars modeled after the White City at the 1893 Columbian Exhibition in Chicago, the source of the City Beautiful movement in America. The new Polo Grounds was festooned with coats of arms representing all the National League clubs along the top of the grandstand. The top of the original Yankee Stadium's upper deck dripped with white filigree bunting, and monuments to beloved former players and managers were actually installed on the playing field. Philadelphia's Shibe Park had a conical domed tower, an escaped turret from some upper-middle-class apartment house over its main entrance. There was the jury box in Boston's Braves Field bleachers, the coop and the crow's nest, and the open-air promenade at Pittsburgh's Ford's Field. Ebbets Field had an 80-foot Italian marble floor in the image of a baseball in its rotunda, and a 27-foot-high domed ceiling, from which hung a chandelier with 12 baseball bat arms that held globes of lights shaped like baseballs. The ticket windows at the old-time parks tended to look like boathouses or beach pavilions with fringed awnings and gentle arches. At Ebbets, they were gilded. The grandstands were always steep and close, dark and mysterious in their back roads after night baseball was instituted. Just beyond the walls of each park were comforting, orienting urban features of one sort or another. The Bronx County Courthouse, the flashing Citgo sign over Kenmore, the gloomy Cathedral of Learning towering over the left field wall in Pittsburgh, clouds of locomotive smoke billowing up from the Boston and Albany tracks behind left and center in Braves Field. They were usually, as well, huge, hand-operated scoreboards somewhere out in center field, visible to all. They showed the line scores of the same 16 teams in the same 11 cities for 50 years, time moving on in the same stately progression, inning by inning. The one feature all the old ballparks shared was outfields that were prodigious by today's standards. The old parks were routinely 420 feet to the farthest reaches of center field, and often 360 to 375 feet down the lines. It was 462 feet to center at Ford's Field, and 461 to left center in Yankee Stadium. The Yankees' previous home, Hilltop Park, stretched an endless 542 feet across the rough sod of Washington Heights. There were practical reasons for this. In the dead ball era, much of the scoring came from balls that found a seam and just kept on rolling. For an important game, the overflow crowd might be put out behind a rope in the outfield, and perhaps their cars or buggies too. The most fantastic ballpark of all was the Polo Grounds, the home of the New York Giants in Upper Harlem. It was a strange place, and strange things happened there. The only man ever killed on a major league playing field, Ray Chapman, died at home plate, hit in the head by a pitch. A fan once died in the stands there, too, between games of a doubleheader, struck by a stray bullet fired from a neighborhood rooftop. He went so quietly that no one realized he was dead at first. They thought he was only nodding off in the grandstand on a sunny summer afternoon. No one ever played polo there. The name was just carried over from the Giants' previous days. James Bennett's old polo field down at 110th Street and 5th Avenue. The new park the team built for itself in 1889 on 156th, 157th Streets and 8th Avenue was shaped like a giant horseshoe facing the Harlem River, the last major league ballpark that ever did, or probably ever will, disrupt the crowded streets of Manhattan Island. In fact, As late as 1874, the whole site was under the Harlem River. Down the lines were the easiest home run shots in the big leagues. 279 feet to left and 257 to right. In some clairvoyant presentiment of Frank Gehry's undulating architecture, the outfield wall stretched all the way out to a center field 483 feet from home plate. There, filling the gap in the horseshoe, were a multi-story set of clubhouses and team offices with a monument at field level to Eddie Grant, a former Giants player killed in World War I. A large, square Longines clock crowning the top of the building, and a huge cigarette hat, always by Chesterfields in between. Sets of stairs led to the field from the clubhouses, where the players from both teams had to enter and exit the field matador-like, accepting the ovations and the jeers and bars of the fans all around them. It was the most glamorous part of the dead ball era, when the close, fast game was played mostly inside the infield and always in the afternoon. John Muggsy McGraw, the irascible manager and part owner of the Giants, would invite each show business celebrities up in the afternoon. They could park their beautiful new automobiles, as varied and idiosyncratic as the ballparks themselves, on the edge of the outfield, and take in a whole 9 innings before motoring back down to Broadway in time for the evening curtain. McGraw, the little Napoleon, did what he wanted, consorted with gamblers, owned part of a pool hall, punched umpires, and feuded with league presidents. It was a pitcher's game, and McGraw had the greatest one alive, his close friend and housemate, Christy Mathewson, the all-American boy grown up. A college man, Matty was as handsome and tall and well-spoken as McGraw was short, profane, and dumpy. He had an easy grace about him, and an outpitch known by the lovely old-fashioned lady as Baby. Then everything changed, practically right before McGraw's eyes. The gamblers who hung out in McGraw's own favorite off-field stomping grounds, Manhattan's Ansonia Hotel, a confection no less unlikely in history or appearance than the Polo Grounds, the building where Bette Midler would get her start in gay bathrooms, and Plato's Retreat would have its brief, notorious reign. But that's another story. We're busy plotting a fix that would throw the 1919 World Series. A hero was needed, and he would appear in the most unlikely battle. The Yankees were the Giants' tenants, their poor relations in the Polo Grounds, when they acquired Babe Ruth from the Red Sox. No deal ever hurt Muggsy more. He hated Ruth right from the beginning, with his seemingly heedless style of play, and his ability to hog the spotlight. Most unforgivable, Ruth would transform the game, take it away forever from the control of the manager with his canny, small ball strategies. Matty went off to fight World War I and returned a dying man, his lungs burned out in a training accident. Meanwhile, the Babe lofted one pop fly after another down the short foul lines of the Polo Grounds and launched moonshots all the way out to the distant bleachers. He had, somehow, transcended the old geometry of the game. It was all about power now. The infinite spaces of the old ball field had suddenly been scanned. The distant fans intimately connected with their hero as they scrambled for the balls he dropped in their midst, and roared their tribute during his leisurely, majestic strolls around the grounds. The infinite spaces of the Polo Grounds, of baseball, had suddenly been negated. McGraw hated it. So did all the old baseball purists. In every sport there are those, usually sports writers, who remain irrevocably opposed to spectacular, flashy play. These individuals, who can be found on your sports page to this day, have yet to accept the home run in baseball, the forward pass in football, the long jump shot in basketball. Even 70, 80, 90 years after these innovations came to pass. To purists, such plays make the game look too easy, almost cheap. They seem to negate the hard work and on-field canyons that defined the young Baltimore Oriole teams McGraw had cut his teeth on back in the 19th century. Ruth was altogether too much. The consummate player of the 1920s. He himself had made the crossing from the old game to the new. The best southpaw in now-dead dead ball game, before effortlessly converting himself into a slugger. The first true slugger anyone had ever seen. Before, home runs were as likely to be inside the park jobs as they were to land in the stands. The leading power hitters rarely hit more than 12 or 15 a season. The entire Yankees team hit all 8 in 1913, their first year in John McGraw's park. And here was Ruth now, setting new records for home runs nearly every season. 29, 54, 59, eventually 60 in 1927, or more than any other whole team in the American League hit that year. The suddenly rich, star-laden Yankees shook the dust off the polo grounds from their feet at McGraw's insistence. But the manager couldn't turn back time by banishing the team to the outer boroughs. The Yankees moved into their own stadium, the house they built, in the totally new Bronx, and won pennant after pennant, setting new attendance records. We know Ruth today mostly from a handful of salvaged photographs and film clips. He seems like a caricature now, a joke with that big, puffy, tragicomic clown's face, a grainy figure with an enormous pot belly, flicking at the ball with his bat, and then skittering around the bases on his spindly legs, smiling and nodding, smiling and tipping his cap. We have heard all the stories about his gargantuan appetites, about all the endless hot dogs, the oceans of booze. Ty Cobb seeing him in the whorehouse the night before a game was through. Or was it 4? Women, a tray of beer, and another one of pig knuckles. Then watching him hit 2 home runs the next day, waddling around the bases, complaining how much his stomach hurt. That babe surely existed, as did the babe who seems to have actually put himself on the disabled list through overeating, and the babe who signed baseballs for sick boys in hospital beds and told them he was going to hit home runs for them. But there was another babe, too, an earlier babe we don't like to dwell on so much, because he reveals another side of the game. This was the young babe, before he had grown the great gut, an athlete of phenomenal, almost frightening quickness and skill. To watch him in action, barreling around the bases, running through anything that gets in his way, was like watching a force of nature. In photographs, his eyes flash under his dark brow, not yet safely encased in flesh. It is the look that suggests other appetites besides the culinary. It is the face of another street kid with an eye out for his opportunities in the big city. Contrary to Muggsy's assumptions, this Ruth was not inattentive to his game, but had an innate, fundamental feel for the sport. This was the babe who stole home 17 times, who was an excellent bunter, hit to the opposite field, had a mean hook slide. The babe who was an outstanding outfielder, who before games would sometimes give the fans a thrill by laying a towel down on home plate and seeing how many times he could hit it on the fly from deep right field. When he was in a slump at the plate, he might break out of it by pitching batting practice
Hello?
Even catching a few pitches, trying to get his timing back. Mobbed wherever he went, Ruth rarely lost his geniality, and then usually only when sorely provoked. He moved amiably through life, always smiling and winking, calling all the strangers who pursued him kid. He took the vicious bench jockeying of the era in stride, and delighted in returning it. The only taunt that ever got to him was when someone called him nigger. It infuriated him, which only made rumors persist. Could he have been? It is a repugnant question, of course, even if one might wish it were so. Even if it would be the best possible joke on organized white baseball, which thought it had banned all African Americans from its midst. It is not worthy the query, though. It is unknowable. Suffice it to say that Ruth was another mongrel American city boy like most of us, like all the rest of us, whether we want to admit it or not. The son of a Baltimore barkeep and his wife, he was handed over to a Catholic orphanage at a young age. The Jesuit fathers set him free in 1914, the same year Louis Armstrong was turned loose from the New Orleans boys' home he had been confined to for youthful indiscretion. 2 teenage boys, released from 2 southern homes, each about to transform his own piece of popular culture forever. Such was the energy of America at the time. The ban on black ball players, known black players, in the major leagues finally ended in 1947 with Jackie Robinson. Within 4 years, a final legend would be playing in the Polo Grounds. Willie Mays was in many ways the antithesis of Ruth. Shorter and more slender at 5'11", 180 pounds, Mays was all elegance and fluidity, a player whose grace caused grown men to mourn his passing from New York for decades. If the Babe had been singular in conquering the 2 great poles of the game, pitching and hitting, it is doubtful there ever was as complete an all-around player as Willie Mays. A 5-skilled player, as the terminology has it. He could hit for power, field, throw, run. How he could run. He ran out from under his hat, he was so fast. He was the first man in over 30 years to hit over 30 home runs and steal over 30 bases in the same season. He hit over 50 home runs on 2 separate occasions, once into the wind off San Francisco Bay. He could do anything. Gliding through life, it seemed even more smoothly than Ruth had, greeting all the adoring strangers with his own generic salute, "Say hey." A good-natured, if somewhat removed young man up from Birmingham.
Alexa, turn all lights blue.
Okay.
Coached mainly by his father, a former Negro League star, bursting on the scene, a fully formed major leaguer it seemed, bursting out with all that incalculable bottled-up talent, that angry, channeled intensity those first remarkable generations of no longer banned black players brought to the big leagues. Robinson and Mays, and Newcomb, and Frank Robinson, and Aaron, and Gibson, and Clemente, to name just a few. Though Mays never seemed that angry, enjoying himself like Ruth, even playing stickball out on the streets of Harlem with the neighborhood kids, waving a broomstick bat at the Spalding, splattering it over the manhole covers. September 29, 1954, the first game of the World Series at the Polo Grounds. The strange old park has less than 10 years to live, and Mays, 23, in his first full Major League season, is about to impress his image indelibly on the history of the game, and to ensure that a last glimpse of the old ballpark will be preserved in countless highlight reels. It's the 8th inning of a tie game, 2 on and nobody out for the visiting Cleveland Indians, and Vic Wertz, a muscular first baseman, is at the plate. Works will be red hot throughout the series, and he's already recorded 3 hits on the day, a triple and 2 singles. Now he rips another soaring fly deep into the endless expanses of the Polo Grounds' right center field. Mays is after the ball. It keeps going, and he is right after it, running and running, outrunning the ball, miraculously bisecting the endless expanse of the ball field, running all the way out over the vast, dark fields of the Republic. Here is the weird center field clubhouse coming into view now, the monument to Eddie Grant, killed in the Great War, the war that took poor Maddie's lungs. Here is a strange scene, frozen in still unfinished reaction. A few faces peering out of the clubhouse window.
Alexa, turn all lights white.
Okay.
Where Mays is. A few of the fans, most of them men wearing hats, and some in jackets too, even in the center field bleachers, just beginning to stand up, just aware that something is going on that doesn't add up. They are all captured forever in this first twitch of a great realization. For Mays has already caught the ball. Running straight out, he has caught it over his left shoulder with barely a shrug. He is already turning back to the infield and is about to throw, even as the crowd is still beginning to bestir itself. He windmills a quick throw back toward the plate, and the runners are kept from scoring. The Giants get out of the inning, win the game, sweep the World Series. The only one Mays will win in his whole long, incomparable career. It was the greatest catch ever made in the World Series. Perhaps the greatest catch ever. Bob Feller, the great Cleveland pitcher, watching from the dugout that day, sniffed later that no one thought it was the greatest catch then. Feller, unaccountably sour for a man blessed with a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, claimed that everyone knew Mays used to deliberately wear his hats too small, so they would fall off and make everything he did look faster, better, more incredible. But the pictures of that frozen moment show that Mays's hat is just falling off then, obviously jarred off by how suddenly he has stopped and turned to make the throw. In fairness, it is easy to see how Feller or any other onlooker could be deceived. The over-the-shoulder catch is the hardest single play in baseball. But watching the film to this day, the casual observer will not see anything very dramatic. Will notice little that stands out from the fantastic fluidity of Mays in motion. The greatness of the catch lies in how effortless Mays made it look, lies in where he is, how far he has had to travel just to be there. He has bridged the same gap as Ruth did with his moonshots, but he has done it as a single running man, catching up to the slugger's ball, closing the circle. More than a decade later, they were still selling boys' models of Mays running down Wirtz's ball, preserving at least some little plastic representation of the old Polo Grounds. Mays would leave when Horace Stoneham, the Giants' drunk of an owner, was lured out to the West Coast, abandoning the stickball-playing kids on the streets of Harlem without a second glance. The Polo Grounds was torn down in 1964, replaced by an ill-considered housing project. Nearly all of the old ballparks met a similar fate over the next few decades: Ebbets Field and Shive Park, Forbes Field and Crossing Field, Sportsman's Park and Comiskey Park, and Tiger Stadium. As the club owners squirmed and ran to get away from any place there might be black people, to where they could find something much more vital, which is to say, parking. The old parks would be replaced at first by new stadiums, mostly out in the suburbs. Round, interchangeable, all-purpose stadiums, many carpeted with artificial turf that could be used just as easily for football games or rock concerts. The Mets brought Mays back to play in what may have been the ugliest of them all, Shea Stadium, a park that already looked irredeemably shabby when it was brand new. He was 42 years old when he appeared in the 1973 World Series. And even though he managed to drive in the winning run in Game 1 off a future Hall of Fame pitcher, he staggered sadly about the outfield, misplaying balls. Everyone gasped that Willie Mays had grown old, and in his embarrassment, he retired after that fall. He had lasted in the end nearly as long as the terrible new cookie-cutter ballparks would. Trying to capitalize on memories and luxury boxes, the owners found an excuse to tear down most of them after only a generation or so. In one town after another, baseball has returned to the inner cities, to new parks that were ostentatiously designed with quirky, eccentric features. A right field wall that is part of an old warehouse, a small knoll in deep center, even a swimming pool in the bleachers. They are improvements over the round, bleak stadiums of the 1960s. Though somehow, they never recaptured the beauty of the old parks, revealing themselves ultimately as what they were, an exercise in ready-made nostalgia. The past, once uncovered, is not so easily revealed. Kevin Baker is the author of 4 novels, including the City of Fire trilogy, Dreamland, Paradise Alley, and Strider's Row. He is currently at work on a non-fiction book about the history of New York City baseball. My Glove, a biography by Stefan Fatsis. When I was asked to contribute to this anthology about the gorgeous minutiae of baseball, I didn't have to think for even a second about a topic. I'd wanted to write about my baseball glove for years. Not only is it the single most personal object I own, the one thing I would be devastated to lose, it is my last best connection to the baseball that defined my life as a kid. Not just playing the game incessantly, but being a crazy fan of it too. My glove is a reminder that the innocence and thrill that made baseball so great and so important still exist in this 30-year-old hunk of leather. I'll tell you what, it's sure broken in perfect. In my 43 years on Earth, this ranks among the highest compliments I have received. Right up there. Definitely top 5. Maybe number 1. So tell me more, Bob Clevenhagen, you curmudgeonly craftsman extraordinaire. You've seen it all, stitched 'em all, Boswell of the baseball glove. You National Archive of 5-fingered leather historical facts and figures. You Ravel of Rawlings Sporting Goods. It's broken in as well as any I ever get, Bob says. On the other end of the telephone line, I smile so hard that blood vessels threaten to pop in my cheeks. After all, Bob has been making and repairing gloves for current and future Hall of Famers for 3 decades. The target for you is the base of your index finger, not the web. That's the way the pro player would do it, not the retail market, not a softball player. Hell no, not the retail market, not a softball player. This looks like a major league gamer. I move from happiness to rapture. In fact, I just might cry. That's high praise, I managed to say, filling dead air, when what I really want to do is drop the phone and dance. Yes, it is, Bob replies. Curt, gruff, no nonsense, Midwestern. He's just the 3rd person in the 119-year history of Rawlings to hold the exalted title of glove designer. Not a man given to bromides and bon mots, which of course makes his words all the sweeter. Yours looks like, well, look in the Hall of Fame. I may spontaneously combust. Those gloves probably look just like yours. Same color, same shape, same faded out look, he says. It's just a nice looking glove. My glove isn't just broken in perfect, to quote Bob. I believe it is stunningly perfect, consummately perfect. Why would anyone use anything else perfect? To play baseball well, you have to consider your glove an ideal. If not, it will let you down. A glove has to feel like an extension of your hand, something over which you have the motor control of a surgeon repairing a capillary. But my glove is more than just a piece of equipment that works for me. I really think it is empirically flawless. Let's start with its shape. Parabolic from the top of the thumb to the tip of the pinky. This is the result of years of pushing those two fingers toward the middle. There's a slight break, about 3 inches from the end of each digit. No ball is leaving my glove because it bent back one of the outermost fingers. When I put the glove on, the first thing I inevitably do is press down the index finger. This transforms the parabola into a circle. Open your palm and spread your fingers wide. Now, curl your fingertips forward. That's what my stationary glove looks like. My glove is soft. It collapses of its own accord when set down. But thanks to its aforementioned shape, it never falls completely flat, full thumb atop full pinky. Instead, the tip of the thumb and the tip of the pinky touch delicately, like God reaching out to Adam on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. I've never understood gloves that open to a V and shut like a book. The idea is to catch a round ball, not a triangular block. Roundness is essential. Softness is too. The trick is to create a glove pliable enough to respond to your slightest movement. To bend to a player's will, a glove needs to bend. Mine does. The index finger of my left hand, I throw right-handed, lies on the exterior of the glove's back, the only digit not tucked inside. This technique provides bonus protection when catching hard-hit or fast-thrown balls. I believe it also helps me better control the glove's behavior. And it looks cool. Each finger curves gently, like a suburban cul-de-sac. The adjustable loops surrounding the pinky and thumb aren't tied too tightly, but their existence is palpable. The web isn't soft and deep, so that a ball might get lost, but rather follows the natural curvature from the top of the index finger to the top of the thumb. The heel of my glove aligns with the heel of my palm. The shearling beneath the wrist strap is matted, but still recognizable. There are no garish personal adornments, just my first initial and last name written meticulously in black ink letters 3/8 inch tall, just above the seam along the thumb. It looks as if I used a ruler to line the letters up. Then there's the smell. Leather, dirt, grass, saliva, sun, spring, childhood, summer, hope, skill, anticipation, achievement, fulfillment, memory, love, joy. I bought my glove in the spring of 1977. I was about to turn 14, out of Little League, and over my head in the 90 feet to first base senior league in the inner suburb of Pelham, New York. A wall of leather graced the sporting goods store in a nearby town. Soft porn in my baseball-centered world. I had to have a Rollins. It would be my third or fourth Rollins, one of them royal blue, because that's what major leaguers wore. And it had to be a good one, because while every other kid pined for his turn at bat, I happily chased grounders until dark. 5 feet tall and under 100 pounds, I was a typical prepubescent second baseman. All field, no hit. An adult-sized glove would make me feel bigger, and play bigger. My choice? The XPG-6 was expensive. I remember the price was $90, though old Rawlings catalogs tell me it was probably $70. Or we were ripped off. I didn't know it then, but it was the fourth priciest glove in the Rawlings line. Thanks, Mom, for not blinking. Not insignificantly, the XPG-6 reminded me of the glove my 8 years older brother wore when he was in high school. Virtually all of my decisions at that age were influenced by my brother, who had taught me how to calculate my batting average when I was in the second grade. At age 9, clearly my athletic prime, I hit .750, aided no doubt by some generous scoring. He played shortstop and, like me, was a competent but unexceptional player. But his glove was just right, round and bendable. I didn't want his, just one like it. So, the XPG-6 it was. It bore Rawlings' famous trademarks: heart of the hide, written inside, a snorting steer stamped in the deep well pocket, the triple action web with a spiral top in grade school cursive. Along the thumb, Rawlings' familiar bright red circle R. Next to it, another